I have always understood that one nation under God meant that we are dependent upon our God. One nation under God, that is the God of our founding fathers. We declared ourselves to be independent, an independent nation, but not independent from God. In fact, reliant upon the providence of God. And if you take a look at the original declaration, that's kind of how it ends, that we're reliant upon the providence of God, the God of our founding fathers. There is a line from one of our patriotic hymns that goes, America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Thy liberty in law. Bondages and captivities come from a departure from God's laws, and freedom and liberty actually comes from an adherence to God's law. Even nations, non-Christian nations that keep some of God's laws, some of the commandments, are actually blessed in those particular areas. But true liberty can only be enjoyed within the framework of a law-abiding society. In fact, the psalmist said this in Psalm 119. Psalm 119 and beginning in verse 44. You have control of those overheads there. Psalm 119, verse 44, probably Ezra who penned this. He said, So shall I keep thy law continually forever and ever, and I will walk at liberty, for I seek thy precepts. I will walk at liberty, for I seek thy precepts. One translation says, I have gained perfect freedom by following your teachings or your law. So God gives many special privileges to those who are obedient, to those who keep his laws. God does not give liberty to lawbreakers. In fact, that's what prisons are for. Is that right? It's not too hard to, not a difficult concept. Prisons are made for those who do not keep the laws, and freedom is for those who keep the law. Not a difficult concept. I think some people actually do better spiritually when they're in a prison, when they're in a captivity, because there are a lot of people that cannot be trusted with liberty. Now, I've expressed this many times, but when liberty has no boundaries, then it becomes license. But I want to reflect, I think I read this little excerpt before from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel Peace Prize winner going back to the 70s. But he made this speech at Harvard back in 1978, and I'm just pulling an excerpt of this speech out, and so I'm reading it to you here. But it begins, the part that I'm looking at anyway, mere freedom per se does not in the least solve all the problems of human life, and even adds a number of new ones. And yet, in early democracies, as in American democracy, at the time of its birth, all individual human rights were granted on the ground that man is God's creature, that is, freedom was given to the individual conditionally in the assumption of his constant religious responsibility. Interestingly, Solzhenitsyn was booed off the stage, Harvard. Kind of tells you where Harvard has come from its origin. I mean, it was founded by some of the Puritans back in the 1600s as a divinity school, but he was booed off the stage for making this statement. But did you get the essence of what Solzhenitsyn was saying? When liberty has no boundaries, it actually creates problems. And I'm sure it's not going to be too hard to come up with some examples on that. But I think this is what Paul meant when he says, use not your liberty for an occasion to the flesh or to carnality. When I was preparing this message here last week, getting ready for Independence Day, I was forced to listen to somebody next to the church playing their X-rated rap music. And of course, to them, this is liberty, that I have liberty to do this. I can play my own music as loud as I want, and this is what some people consider liberty. However, it was infringing on my liberty, because I am forced to listen to offensive and vulgar music. Now that's infringing on my liberty. So when our liberty infringes on somebody else's liberty, that's not really true liberty, is it? But that's the way society is today. But anyway, the world will be the world. Although our nation started off a little bit different, didn't it? It's really the true church that should set the pace. Those who have the law written in their heart. Just quoting here from Galatians 5 for a second. Galatians 5:13. For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. This is the very purpose that God set his people free to begin with. The beginning, so that they could serve him, and so that they could serve one another. And actually, if we're serving one another because of love, that's not bondage, is it? It's bondage when we're forced to do something, but when we're loving one another, when we're adhering to the commandments because of our love for him, that's liberty. That's not bondage. We serve out of love, and that's liberty. Now, James talks about the perfect law of liberty. Let's look at James for a minute. In James chapter 1, and this is really what people do when they have the power of choice. It's one thing when you're forced to do something, but it's another thing when you have the power of choice to go left or go right. That's the perfect law of liberty. That's how we're tested, when we have the power to make a choice. Looking at James 1, 23, 24, it says, For if any be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass or a mirror. For he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. So here's somebody that cannot be trusted with liberty. He knows what's right, he sees what's right, but he doesn't follow through. So here's somebody who cannot be trusted with liberty. He takes no heed to what he knows is right. I have heard some feeble excuses in my life. I remember one teenage boy that we used to have here, about 16, and when I used to deal with him on certain issues, he would say something like, well, after all, I'm just a kid. That is pretty feeble when he's grown up in the church and he's known the difference between left and right, and tries to cop out on that one. Just a kid. But there are people that you trust with liberty, and there are those that you do not trust with liberty. you trust the law keepers with liberty. Is that right? If your kids are obedient, you can trust them with liberty. If they're law breakers, you don't want to trust them with liberty because you know they're going to get into trouble. Is that right? And then going on to verse 25, James 1:25. But whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. So here is the law of liberty defined. Here's a man with an obedient ear. He hears, he knows what's right, and he follows through. He does what's right. These are people that you can trust with liberty, the obedient. And these are people that can be trusted with privileges too, can't they? Everybody wants to have privileges. We would all like to be blessed in many ways. Maybe we'd like to have gifts. We would like to have maybe certain authority. Maybe we would like to have finance. We'd like to be successful. But not everybody can be trusted with those kinds of things. In fact, it can be a stumbling block to people if they haven't been proven out a little bit. You know, one time we had a number of young people in our church. We had a bubble. Maybe it was probably 16, 17 young people we had in the church. And sometimes our girls would get together and go to the mall. And sometimes they would make plans to meet people there that they weren't supposed to be meeting. And sometimes they wanted to go to a movie there that they shouldn't have been going to. But there was one girl in the group who always said, "But Pastor Dan would not want us to do this." And she kind of kept them in check. Now, which one in this group are you going to trust with liberty? That's not hard to figure out, is it? The one who's obedient, the one who you can give liberty privileges to. So, our theme is independence. Today's generation has a little problem kind of with the true definition here of independence, drawing a line between liberty and license. But after all, who's to really say what's right or wrong? When our nation under God has thrown the cornerstone of morality out the door, the Ten Commandments, we've thrown the cornerstone out of the building. I mean, what do you measure to? Who's to say what's right and wrong? We call ourselves one nation under God, only we don't want your commandments. I mean, if your children said to you, "Yes, I'm under you, but I'm not going to obey your commandments," I mean, that really doesn't mesh, does it? When you throw the cornerstone of morality, the Ten Commandments out, what do you measure to? Who's to say what's right, what's wrong? But our judgment, I think, today goes something like this. The person who condemns the act is the offender. The person who commits the act, he's free to do that, but the person who condemns the act, he's not free to do that. He's the offender. So, in short, not trying to be negative today, but it's just the trend that we're on in this nation, and I do believe that the eagle's going to revive at the end. But I'll tell you what, we're on kind of a downward spiral at the moment. But as we have said, not too many people can be trusted with true liberty. Real endowments or success, wealth, authority. God set Israel free from a tremendous affliction, bondage. They weren't free with their bodies. They had no freedom of expression. Their wealth was controlled by Pharaoh. Everything was, everything they had actually belonged to an alien power. So they didn't have too much liberty, no freedom of expression. They worked 7 days a week. And so God set his people free so that they could serve him. And he set them free with some benefits, like 400 years of back wages. And they all had a restoration of their health and wealth. Now, that's quite a privilege. And they were brought out, given freedom of expression. And just quoting from Psalm 105, I believe we brought this out a couple weeks ago. Psalm 105, actually I heard Alexander Scorby speaking this psalm this morning. Psalm 105:37, it says, he brought them forth also with silver and gold, and there was not one feeble person among their tribes. God really gave them quite an endowment here. 400 years of back wages. The Egyptians were giving them gold and silver, hoping that they would go at that point. They came out with restoration of health. And what did they do with this liberty that was given to them? Well, they used their liberty for an occasion to the flesh, for carnality. They used their bodies for fornication. They used their gold for idolatry, golden calf. They used their freedom of expression to badmouth leadership and badmouth God himself. And so because of that, God had to put them under all kinds of rules and restrictions because they couldn't be trusted with liberty. The law is for the lawbreaker. That's pretty plain, isn't it? All these rules, they had to be delineated, 613 different laws that governed and regulated every part of their life because they couldn't be trusted with liberty. I really wouldn't want to live in under that kind of a tent, would you? Having every part of your life regulated. You see the Jews today, and you see what they go through every day, the Orthodox Jews. They have these readings they have to go through. They're standing and going through their prayers every day, and their whole life is regulated, what they wear and what they eat and the whole bit. But the point is that some people cannot be trusted with liberty. They do better in captivity. So Paul uses Israel's history as a warning to us, to the church. And this example that he uses is to the end of time. It's right to the end of human life here on this earth. And so we're looking at 1 Corinthians now. We all want liberty. We all want financial freedom, freedom of expression. But what does unmerited liberty do for people? I say unmerited liberty. Well, this is what they did with their liberty. They suddenly got free from all of their bondages. And in chapter 10, 1 Corinthians 10, beginning in verse 5, it says, "But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness." Now, these things were our examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. And Paul goes on to say that all of this was an example to the end of time. And just going on to the next verse. Verse 11, now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So, Israel was freed from alien power, but they could not be trusted with liberty, could they? They blew away every right that they had to liberty. And so God had to put them under all kinds of restrictions because they could not be trusted. In fact, 613 to be exact. The law was added because of transgression. God did not give them this law at the beginning. He gave it to them after. That law was not in their hearts, so he had to give them all kinds of rules to live by. Would you like to do that? Galatians 3:19. It says, wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions. Came afterward because they couldn't be trusted. So here's the sad truth. Some people do better with their lives regimented and under a lot of rules. Some people do better in prison. In fact, our dear brother Mark Keenum, who's chaplain in the prison, he calls it jailhouse religion. They do very well in prison, very spiritual. They do very good. And I think, actually, they are doing good in prison. The danger is when they get out. And when I preach in prison, I always warn them about the dangers of liberty. When you get out of here, don't go back to the old friends, the old ways. Make new friends with God's people. Get in a church. Change associations. Because I know, and we've known people personally in prison that were doing so good we thought they were going to be a shining star when they got out, and they showed up for church about 2 weeks, and that was the end of it, and they were back to the old life again. Tell you what, some people, it would be better for them to spend their whole life in prison and get to heaven. It would be better for them to spend their whole life in a wheelchair and get to heaven than to have liberty, because some people cannot be trusted with liberty. Remember who liberty is for. It's for those who keep the law. They get a reflection of themselves. They see what they are. They know their potential. They know their weakness. But they're careful to walk in God's ways, and they get it into their heart, and they can be trusted. They can be trusted with success. They can be trusted with finance. They can be trusted with endowments and gifts and authority and all kinds of things, all kinds of privilege, because they have the law in their heart. Amen? It's awful quiet in here. You could sum it up nations even that this applies to, because there are nations that were under alien powers, but some of these nations that were under the dominion of others, they actually did very well being dominated by another nation. There was law and order. The economy was good. In fact, one nation that I'm thinking of, they became an exporter of grain, wheat. They were number 10 in the world as an exporter of grain. But this nation wanted their independence. So they got it. They revolted. They got their independence. And how did it turn out? Well, it was a total breakdown of law and order, and all kinds of corruption, and everything was in disrepair and breakdown all over the country. Nothing worked. Everything was broken. And they were spending millions of their money, their currency had been so devaluated that they were spending millions of dollars for a loaf of bread. I mean, it was total chaos. They did much better under this other power, much better. You get the point? They could not be trusted with any kind of liberty. In fact, I think that's one of the problems with this country. We think that democracy is some kind of a panacea. The word panacea means it's a cure-all. We want to, see all these countries have democracy. So we actually have destabilized a lot of countries, helping them overthrow these so-called tyrannical governments so that they can have a democracy. But I'll tell you something. In a wicked nation, they're going to vote in the exact same kind of power that they just ousted, and maybe even worse than they have. We should just keep our nose out of it, because God appoints leaders, the good ones and the bad ones, and we should just stay out of it. I mean to get political there, but that's the truth of it. We think democracy is kind of a cure-all, but I think our interference has done more damage than good. Well, sin is what brings the reproach and bondage upon any land. And let me just quote here from Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs 14:34. It says, "Righteousness exalteth a nation." Well, I'll tell you what, when the nation is under God and keeping the commandments, they do very well. But sin brings reproach, is a reproach to any people. At one time in our righteous nation, it was a reproach to have an illegitimate child. But recent statistics tell us that 50% of the babies born to women under 30 in this country are illegitimate. 50%. Half of the babies born in this country unto women under 30 are illegitimate. And you have Hollywood people standing up there. They're not married, and they're boasting about their new coming illegitimate child that's coming. It's all accepted today. It's all okay. Sin is a reproach to any land. And here's another one. The gay community. They're pretty upset with Mr. Trump here recently because I don't know who declared June Gay Month or Gay Pride Month, but somebody did. I don't know who did. Probably the gays did. But they were so upset that Mr. Trump didn't recognize, and promote Gay Month. You see what people do with liberty? That's why there's a humbling coming to this country. This country needs a little humbling so that we can get things right again. Because we have come to a place as a nation where we can't be trusted with liberty. I've probably shared this story before about a lady who was very faithful in the church, and she had enough to get by, but she was always there in the prayer meeting. She was always in church. She was a solid member of the church. And God met her needs. But then suddenly, she got this huge inheritance. And it was as though, hey, I'm going to make up for lost time. So she's traveling the world, going here, Vegas, and here and there, all over the place, And she would stop in at the church maybe every 3 or 4 months and say, "Hi, I'm having a blast," and toodaloo, and I'm off again. See, she would have been better off really just being poor. Some people would be better off spending their whole life in a wheelchair. In fact, one girl said that. She said, "I have to be here because I know," this was something that happened afterwards. She wasn't born in a wheelchair, but she ended up in a wheelchair. And she said, "I know I have to be here because if I ever had my liberty, I'd go off into sin." And I'll tell you what, it's better to be in a wheelchair your whole life and get to heaven. It's better to have nothing your whole life and get to heaven. Right? It's better not to be successful. Success kills people. Fame kills people. Even gifts have been corrupted by people like Balaam and ministers who are using their gifts, prostituting their gifts for money. Be better not to have them. Better to have nothing. But that's really not what we want to see. We want to see our people blessed. We want to see our people have liberty. We want to see our people have privileges. Amen? But we want to be able to be trusted. That's why God deals with people for a long time. I mean, God dealt with David. I mean, he went through the wilderness, and even after all of the dealings that he went through, he got into a place where he got careless. That's why I think, we need things in our life to keep us, to bring us down once in a while. We'd like to have that 100-fold blessing, but with things that also keep us from getting lifted up. I mean, look at the Apostle Paul. I mean, here's somebody that had third heaven revelations. Would you like to have third heaven revelations? Would you like to be caught up to the throne and hear words unlawful to speak on earth? Would you like that? I mean, yeah, I would like that too, but Paul had to have a thorn in the flesh to keep him humble from those things. Are you with me here? Because not only for his sake, but for people who would make a god out of Paul, he had to have a thorn in the flesh. He besought the Lord to get rid of this, but the Lord said, "No, my grace is sufficient." So here's a man who has third heaven revelations, but he has to have something that keeps him down too. So how much liberty do we really want? How much liberty, do we want to pay a price for some of these things? I mean, there is a price to pay. It seems as though the world can just spew out whatever they want to. Music, whatever, filthy language, but truth is something that's not going over too big these days. You can't tell people how it really is. Let's look at another verse. This is the last one here in Amos. Amos chapter 5 and verse 10. It says, "They hate him that rebuketh in the gate, and they abhor him that speaketh uprightly." True in the time of Amos, true today, isn't it? They hate him that rebuketh in the gate, that says this is wrong, that says this is sin, that says this is what's bringing our country down, or him that speaks uprightly. But this is why people lose their liberty. Because they can't be trusted with it. And that's why God is going to have to deal with this country too. I remember many years ago, I had a dream of an eagle. It was a very real dream. Very real. It was like a night vision. And the eagle had a chain on its leg. And it was so sad. It it looked decrepit, like a eagle going through a moat, but it had a chain on its leg and it longed to leave the ground, but it couldn't. And, I see that as America. But the thing about the eagle is it has a renewing too. It comes down, but it renews itself. And I do believe that that's the way it's going to work out. But right now, the way things are, the trend that we're on in this nation, we're on a downward spiral unless God intervenes, unless we see some revival. And I believe that God makes a difference in times like that. But we just need to pray for the true liberty, to be free from our bondage of sin and evil and carnality and everything else. Not particularly here, but everybody has problems of some kind, but this does go out to a bigger audience. We need to see a release from the things that God had to put his people under all of these restrictions for. We want to have the law in our hearts. Amen? See that reviving that's going to come. As the song goes, if my people, which are called by my name. This is not a promise. This is not something given to the world. The world is not going to come up with any answers to save us. If my people, which are called by my name, humble themselves, pray. It's through the intercession of the church that this nation is going to be saved by God's grace. Amen? We want to be people that have privilege, that can be trusted with liberty, success, the kind of success that promotes the kingdom of God. That's the kind of success we want.